Now, one of the more interesting just progressions in the last 70 years of watches is the dive watch. It was originally created as a useful tool in the growing field of commercial diving and recreational diving, and now has become just a all-purpose sports watch that can just handle any circumstance and have been a great, just useful tool in the world that we live in now, which is kind of just going increasingly more casual. Now, what I want to do today is look at 10 of the best luxury dive watches. And just to set some ground rules at the beginning, going to limit this list to 10 luxury dive watches. Most of them are going to be above $3,000, so that's kind of the cutoff here. They have to be kind of in that range. Also, when looking at this, they have to be capable of theoretically diving, so that's another kind of point of criteria here as well. And not to get too much into the semantics, but when you're talking about luxury, I think there should be a general just brand perception of these watches in the mass market, or they have to have some qualities about them that would maybe just be perceived as luxury. Whether we're talking about proprietary materials, movements, things of that sort that would allow them to obtain that status. Also, before we jump into this video, definitely check out some more, I would say, playful approaches to the dive watch. One being the high-tech ceramic by Rado, the Captain Cook, that are available on teddybaldassarre.com. In addition to that, the Oris Diver 65 cotton candies in bronze. These models I wouldn't say are necessarily dive watches that you're gonna be taking on your next expedition, but certainly some cool, colorful, and fun ways of going about executing that design format. So definitely check it out, teddybaldassarre.com. Also, we do have watch consultations available, so if you have any questions for something on our site, fill out that consultation form and talk to a dedicated watch specialist that can help answer any of your questions. Very happy and just proud about this feature. I really wanted to kind of get this rolling, as I know there's a lot of things that go involved with buying a watch online, and I know this would be helpful for many people out there. So now with our first watch on this list, we're going to be looking at Tudor, but not with the typical Tudor that gets most of the shine, but instead one of my favorite dive watches between $4,000 and $10,000, and that is the Tudor Pelagos. Now, when I look at the Tudor Pelagos and I think about, what is kind of the old ethos of like Rolex and what they were going after, talking about well-made dive watches for actual function, I think the Tudor Pelagos is the best embodiment of that from the Tudor catalog. The Black Bay leans more into the heritage. The Pelagos is more of a capable actual dive watch. That is actually seen in practice with that 500 meters of water resistance. You're also getting a titanium case, which is going to be more lightweight on the wrist. In terms of legibility as well, the markers are a bit larger, also getting a larger case diameter, which I think when you're talking about function is important. And then in addition to that, also that clasp on this thing is probably one of the best in the category. Absolutely knocks it out of the park. You have a few fixed positions, and then you also have a slider in that clasp. One of the best clasps on the market, no question. The Pelagos, I think, is one of the most overlooked and neglected watches, both from enthusiasts, but also by the brand itself. I'd love to see more of these. I think I just keep beating a dead horse with this, saying that I'd love to see some other Pelagos models where there's different colorways and different size options. These are fantastic dive watches and capable ones at that really, I think, embody the Tudor design DNA well. All right, now next up, I wanna just get the obvious one out of the way. We could talk a little bit about it, but we're talking about the Rolex Submariner. Now, the new reference with that new case at 41 millimeters, that is certainly going to probably be the standard for a dive watch in the luxury range. Now, let's just talk about the obvious. You can look at pretty much any Rolex Submariner option, looking at some of the previous references as another alternative to this. And I think they would all be capable options depending on what you want to go for, as some of those are certainly going to be capable as well of still sustaining the task depending on the year, model, and being able to do tests if you're actually using it for a real dive watch. But then I don't want to get in the argument whether or not people actually use Submariners for the actual intended purpose, because probably the answer would be no. The Submariner is quite frankly the most iconic watch of all time, and the word iconic gets thrown around a lot, but this is the luxury dive watch to get if you just wanted to get one and be done forever. The challenge with these is they are difficult to even get. At retail, even on the secondary market, you're paying huge premiums. I think we all know this, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about it. You can also look at some of the more vintage models as well, looking at some of just the classic models. I know that kind of goes against the criteria mentioned at the beginning, talking about they need to be capable dive watches. But back looking at that era, I think Rolex just epitomized that idea of what a dive watch should be, and it really set the stage for what modern Rolex would become and how they've almost ascended a product category in a way with what they've been able to do. Okay, so now let's look at probably one of the more price competitive dive watches in the world of luxury sports watches, and that is the Omega Seamaster Diver 300. We'll start here. So This is a watch that has certainly seen some benefit of with the James Bond connection. From Pierce Brosnan in the 1990s, it's just kind of elevated as that probably, I would imagine, best-selling model for Omega when looking at it in the last 25 years. That's come down also to just the price and where this one is positioned. $4,900 on a rubber strap, $5,200 on a bracelet, and that is fantastic positioning for what you're getting with this watch. You have a new generation of coaxial master chronometer movements with the 8800 inside of here. Pretty wearable dimensions despite the 42mm case. You do have that helium escape valve on this one, which I know can be a bit of a polarizing topic. A lug-to-lug distance of 49.5mm, but 300 meters of water resistance, reliable movement on the inside. That's also on display on the back, which is, you know, utilitarian machine finish, but very good for the money in terms of, I would say, it's decoration. It's a sports watch at the end of the day, so I think it does look the part. Also coming with the ceramic bezel, sapphire crystal with anti-reflective coating on both sides, and that wave engraved etched dial is one of the most eye-catching dials you're going to find for the price range. This is just a watch that I think from a value positioning, and when you're talking about luxury and value, that's something that doesn't necessarily go hand in hand, but when you look at the rest of the marketplace, this is a very competitively positioned dive watch in the range. But say you're somebody that wants some more heritage appeal. You want to look back to the 1957 Seamaster 300 and kind of more be in alignment with that, but you want contemporary specifications and a pretty wearable case as well without the helium escape valve. With that, you have the Omega Seamaster 300. Now, this isn't going to be as eye-catching as the wave dial, and in terms of its approach and maybe value in the market, I could see why this one isn't going to be as popular, but for someone like myself that likes that heritage look, I also like that there's no helium escape valve on this thing. This is a nice, compelling offer as well. So Omega did just revamp this entire collection. The big updates with this, I actually have a video on it, but just some of the points really are coming down to the case thickness. You're dropping around a full millimeter of thickness on this to 13.7, making this one wear a lot more compact on the wrist. 47.8 millimeters in that lug-to-lug distance when measuring this with my calipers, so pretty wearable across the wrist, wearing closer to that of a 40mm case. So the wear on this one is quite good. It is also a METAS certified movement on the inside, so it does feature that Omega 8912, so that is the basically no date version of the 8900. So at that second position, we'll also have that isolated hour hand function, which is very useful for a no date. And then in similar fashion to the Spectre, we'll also have that lollipop second hand on the actual end or tip of that second hand, which I think is a cool feature. This one leaning a bit more into heritage, doesn't really have the same maybe value packed into it like the Seamaster Diver 300, but still a very good dive watch in this range if you're talking about luxury dive watches in a top 10. Now for the next selection of watches here, we're just going to just say the new Oris Aquis models with the Calibre 400s. And I was a little bit hesitant to feature these watches on this list just because Oris for many years, I think we're seen in a certain light, featuring many Sellita calibers and priced in a position around $2,000 for many of their dive watches, but since have now adapted and upgraded many of their watches with the new Calibre 400s. Now, these movements have a lot of things going for them, and when you stack them up to other things in the market in regards to the actual specifications, they are rather impressive. You're talking about a 5-day power reserve, crazy anti-magnetic properties, good actual range of deviation in terms of accuracy, and pretty tasteful and thoughtful display and arrangement, utilitarian completely with the movement, but still very thoughtful and well constructed. Now the Aquis now currently has 2 different size variants. At the time of recording this video, you had the 43.5mm option. That was the original unveiling of that Calibre 400. And you also have the 41.5mm options that are gonna be more in alignment to a 40mm case. The good news is here, just looking at the dimensions of that Calibre 400 and just the case, looks like the 39.5mm would be able to actually appropriately fit this actual movement. So that is great to see as well. But the Calibre 400 and what it's done for Oris and elevating, kind of putting them in an interesting position within the marketplace, I think is probably worthy of being in a top 10 list for the best luxury dive watches. When you're talking about a watch brand that was there right at the beginning of dive watches, Blancpain is right there. The 50 Fathoms was first unveiled in 1953, and I have done a video on the channel looking at one of their just different models and talking about the history in greater detail, but just to kind of get into this here, the Blancpain's original design stemmed from a particular Captain Robert Bob Malibert of the French Navy, who needed a watch fit for his team in command of frogmen. Now, there's a lot of debate on who was first, but there's a ton of history that supports Blancpain as being the first commercially available dive watch in the market in 1953. The Blancpain 50 Fathoms was used by many different navies throughout the world, but probably first was, I think, made famous through its adaptation by the French Navy during the 1950s. Through the decades, the 50 Fathoms was of course adapted to follow industry trends while retaining its legitimacy as a dive tool watch before taking on more of a luxury positioning, kind of where the brand is now, and just really enjoys that kind of positioning. In terms of what is available in regards to Blancpain, you have quite a few different options to go for. Many of the 50-15 references are going to have that traditional case size. I've looked at a titanium variant in the past on the channel, but you can also look at their Barracuda models and even the bathyscaphe as another alternative offshoot of the 50 Fathoms DNA. So probably the most unique watch on this list in terms of complications is the JLC Polaris Mariner Memovox, a watch that has roots dating back to 1968. Now, really what makes this watch notable is its alarm functionality, and the Memovox collection as well as the Polaris collection kind of have just merged forces in the past as well as with this new modern creation. And when many people think of JLC, I don't think people consider their dive watches as maybe the top point of consideration for the brand, but there is no question that this is one of the cooler watches that they make. Also will feature that JLC 956 AA caliber on the inside, and when flipping this watch over, you can of course see the actual alarm function at work. When you do set that alarm on the front of the dial, we can actually let it play here and just show what that audible tone will be, but something you don't typically see with a dive watch. And when you're talking about a mixing of material finishing from the dial perspective, the case perspective, as well as the movements, JLC here is one of the best in class, no question. Now next up we have another, I would say, value-packed dive watch that is a bit more overlooked, and that is the Breitling Superocean Heritage Edition. And why I want to mention the Heritage Edition is because this was the dive watch that kind of was the exchange of technologies between Tudor and Breitling. Now, Breitling sent over the B01 caliber that would be in the Tudor Black Bay Chrono, and then on the flip side, Breitling would utilize their MT calibers within their Superocean collection, allowing this one to obtain 70 hours in its power reserve. In terms of price range, it is going to be around that same range as the Omega Seamaster Diver 300, which I think many people opt to just go for that option instead. But if you want something that leans a bit more into the heritage just realm while also offering a nice reliable movement on the inside, this is one that I think just gets overlooked quite a bit. Now, the 42mm case with this particular variant that we're showing here is going to wear, I would say, closer to that of a 41mm case, but might be a little bit larger than what somebody might want. But the finishing of this one with its dial, the broad hour hand, you've seen a little bit more of this leaning into heritage with just Breitling in general. And I think a lot of that resurgence of the brand in regards to kind of keying into kind of their more heritage roots. We've seen this with the chronomats coming out and kind of getting revitalized in a way. You have this with the new Premier collections with the new Pistachio that probably also leans a bit more into that. These Superocean models were definitely contributors into Breitling's reestablishment, and in terms of where they're sitting in the market, probably one of the more overlooked dive watches in the luxury price segment under $10,000. Now, if you had to decide on the luxury dive watch that would just sit at the gates and basically be the standard that every other luxury dive watch would have to at least get to a certain point, if not exceed, if they wanted to enter and be classified as a luxury dive watch or be at least in the realm of comparison, I think the Tudor Black Bay is that modern example of meeting that standard. Now, where it's sitting in the market in terms of price is probably one of the most compelling and value-packed options. And I know putting luxury and value-packed in the same type of just video is sometimes very difficult to do and maybe a stretch to do. But I do think the Tudor Black Bay is a very competitively priced product for what you are getting. The design of them are fantastic. The now variations that you have at your disposal, whether you're looking at the Black Bay 58s, the traditional Black Bay 41s, you could also look at something like this, the Black Bay ceramic that I'm wearing on my wrist right now. This one probably not the most suitable dive watch, but still a badass looking watch. And if you had to look at the one contributing factor would allow Tudor to resurge as a brand in the last decade and really develop a nice chunk of market share, it's because of the Tudor Black Bay, and it's for good reason. These are fantastic watches. If you have around $4,000 to spend, these are some of the best watches to consider in the range. If you just want one watch and be done for life, these are probably some of the best options that you could go for, no question about it. The new selection of in-house calibers are also a great thing to be seeing across their entire catalog. You're getting 70 hours of power reserve, COSC certified movements as well, and even METAS certified movements now with, say, this Black Bay ceramic. So it'll be interesting to see how Tudor continues to position themselves, but in terms of where you're going for around $4,000, you want one dive watch, your first luxury dive watch, I think the Tudor Black Bay has to be at least one watch you look at. Now next we have IWC. In terms of watches with dive watch cred, the Aquatimer has to be considered. So specifically here, I want to look at the reference, the IW3290001. So like JLC, this is a brand where dive watches don't necessarily jump to mind, though the Aquatimer collection dates back to 1967, and a dual crown design housed within a super compressor case produced by EPSA and seen from countless other brands in the 1960s and 70s. The history here, I think, makes the Aquatimer something to consider when looking at a luxury dive watch. In the last several years, the Aquatimer has consistently offered more unique case concepts and designs, often with internal bezels, a trait carried over into the modern Aquatimer collection. All the other watches mentioned on this list had external timing bezels, which in the past had the risk of getting bumped, and the newer IWC Aquatimers have a novel function where you can rotate an external bezel to rotate an internal that lives within the safety of the watch case. Similar to what I mentioned with Tudor and kind of neglecting the Pelagos a bit, I think the Aquatimer sometimes gets neglected a bit. Would it be nice to see some in-house calibers inside the Aquatimer? Absolutely, and I think these would do a lot better, and still are some compelling offers in the world of luxury dive watches. Now to round out our list, looking at a dive watch from Germany and how they do dive watches, let's look at the Glash&uuml Original SeaQ. Now this watch might not have the same amount of heritage as other models on this list, but in terms of actual just case finishing, movement finishing, can definitely hang with the best of them on this list without question. Now the SeaQ from Geo does trace its lineage back to a utilitarian model called the Spasmatic, the Type RP TS200, and that was released in 1969, and in the past few years, Geo has been unveiling a lot of these different variations of the SeaQ. Now, originally they had the more pano date versions, which is a bit more of a design style owned by, I would say, Geo and other German manufacturers. And it looked great on a dive watch, very different, but you also have these new variations at a 39.5mm case, which wear very true to that of a Tudor Black Bay 58 in terms of a direct comparison of wearability. The bracelets are very good. You have a slide adjuster with that hidden button within that clasp with that Geo logo, which is just really cool. The movement finishing on these are very, very good. The only downside for the 39.5mm variants is you can't actually see them when you flip the watch around because they do have closed case backs. On the larger variations, the pano dates, you do have a sapphire box exhibition case back, which is pretty cool and does show the full view of the movement on the inside. Now these are not going to necessarily be the luxury dive watch for everybody by any means, but for a true type of enthusiast that really just cares about case finishing and movement finishing, the Geo SeaQ certainly needs to be considered. All right guys, and those are my picks for some of the top luxury dive watches on the market. Now I know I probably omitted something that you would have liked to seen on the list, so please leave comments down below about any other options that people should consider. I wanted to only keep it to 10. I wanted to keep it diversified while also hitting on some of the key models that I thought should be mentioned. If you did enjoy the video, thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Really would appreciate that as well, as it does help out the channel. Also definitely take advantage of that watch consultation feature. Follow us on Instagram as well, as we're posting some great photos of watches over there. It's a great way to stay up to date with the content. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.